she's watching this. After the way she snapped at me.
I'm live. Not working. The link doesn't work.
Oh, that's cool.
Your connection. Is it work? It is working. Look at that. I got some camera inception there. So, pleasantries out of the way. Hopefully everybody's enjoying their week and getting ready for a nice, fun weekend. Thanks for the thumbs up. And the two people watching this are actually still sitting in the room. So it's fun. Hopefully we can develop this further and get to lots of thousands of streamers. But we're looking at linear fills today. Specifically one. This is a linear drum groove sheet. Now, let's just set the scene. Before we get into it, there's going to be a bit of nerding out, as per the channel. Third viewer, that's impressive. So, we're getting into this. It was written by one of my tutors. Now, the only discrepancy I have here, and this is the thing that bothers me, and I don't know how you're going to want to approach this, but it's written with 8th notes, but it's got 16 notes. So, you would then technically, if you played it in 8th notes, with the 16, you would be over 2 bars because you would then have 2 bars of 4, which would make 8/8. Or wait, yes, no, 2 bars of 8, which would make the 16. Or you play the 16th notes and you end up with just 1 bar. So you either have a 2-bar fill essentially, or a 1-bar fill. That's what I'm trying to get at. And the other bit that makes this a little bit more tricky is that they're in odd numbers. It's all about odd numbers, making an overall even feel at the end of it because you're adding up to an even number being 16. Third player has entered the game. So we're looking at, and you can do this with anything as long as it adds up to, for example, 16. You can do this to add up to whatever even number you want if you're in an even time signature, i.e. 4/4 or any of those kind of similar ones, which would be more of a common odd time like 6/8, 12/8. And so just find numbers that you might want and disperse them over the kit. So you might have a 5, 6, 8, 7, and that could be your fill. I haven't done what that would add up to in my head. I just picked numbers out. But as this is linear, the caveat that makes it a little bit more tricky is that we are not hitting any 2 voices at the same time. So we are more working on single limb approach here, and that's what makes this a bit tricky. This is a bit of a challenge to get underway, but once you get it, it really opens up the fluidity behind the kit in terms of groove and fill. So the one we're going to work on today is I think it is the 7/5/4. So the 7/5/4, let's try and get that. I don't yet have these cool funky graphics. This is your 7/5/4. So you see your grouping of 7, 5, and 4, and you see it notated across the kit. So you've got your hi-hat, you've got your snare, and down here you've got your bass drum. It's probably quite blurry on the phones, but when I start getting double-digit viewers, I'll invest in some pretty crazy graphics. So the 7/5/4, again, we're not hitting any 2 drums at the same time. So 7/5/4, if we take it with right-hand lead, so please ignore it if you're a left-hand drummer in the sense of starting with your right. You'll be starting with your left. And we're starting for this one on the snare, rack tom, floor tom, and we're moving that across it. So it would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The end of that 7 is on the bass drum. We are then going to go into the 5 with the same pattern, but we're just obviously shorting the numbers, and we're still hitting that final 5th note with our bass drum. So then that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I know you can't see down there, but that's 5. And the 4 at the end there is the even one, and that's where we're just going to be right, left, foot, foot. So you get 2 bass drums. So that will add a much different feel because a lot of the time you won't really find many bass drum hits in a fill. A lot of times fills are very kind of, that was ugly as hell, but they're really hand heavy fills. And so this will help get that building block and that foundation to be able to incorporate the lower hemisphere of your body between the bass drum and also the hi-hat. You can get some tasty notes in a fill by stepping the hi-hat. So really slowly, if we're counting out loud, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So at the end there, that's just a bit of a flam. It's not anything relevant to this. But what you end up finding is, although you're doing odd groupings, the overall fill itself is even, and it has a nice bit of a flow to it. It kind of has almost like if you tipped an egg down a hill and it made tom and snare and bass drum noises, you could almost envision it kind of moves on itself, and that was a derivative. Can I have a word here? Derivative. It was derivative. It was a bit of a deviation. I've got my QI guys over here. It was slightly different from the actual fill that we're doing there, but the point still stands where you then can start moving limbs around. So really slow one more time before we can maybe do a bit more exploration with this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. So you're just essentially, if you think of just doing singles, and at the end of the 7th, that's your bass drum. On the 5th, that's your bass drum, and on the 3 and 4, those are your bass drums. But you're just alternating right, left, right, left. Obviously, you can get crazy. Down the road, you can subdivide this into 16th note triplets, into 8th note triplets. And that's a whole different world in itself. I know nobody's asked this question yet, but to preempt it, you've got quarter notes, then you've got 8th notes, then you've got 16th notes, 32nd, 8th note triplets, 16th note triplets. And so that is a bit of a sphere of how you do things. A bit of a trick on the 32nd notes. There are 3 tails, if you will, going across. And the way that you count that is you end up with 8 notes every beat. So it's instead of 16th notes, which is 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a, that's 4 quarter notes. With 32nd notes, you would go 1 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 4 E and a. And so that's how you then end up getting those 4 notes, but you've obviously chopped it up into many different pieces. And so that's a bit of a nerd tangent there, but yes, that is the fill, and you can appreciate why I'm confused as to how my tutor wrote it, because there are not 2 tails to indicate that they would be 16th notes. They are written in a very visibly 8th note kind of way. The trick with that, whether you're doing 16th notes or 8th notes, is that because you're dealing in either 16th or 8th notes and even numbers, these are odd numbers. So it's going to be chopping it across the actual numbers, the fills, right? So you would end up with 2.5 in the first, and then you'd have to make up the first half of the second part of that fill with the last half of the previous set of numbers. And I know that might not make sense to many people, but that's a bit more in depth there. So one more time real quick before we probably get into a Q&A, which won't go for very long because there's nobody watching, is right, left, right foot. And obviously that's being put out as a fill. That is something that I want to work on as a group. And you can really have a lot of fun with that and take it into sounding very syncopated or not, depending on where you then make that accent land on the snare drum. So that's pretty much the fill that I wanted to go into. That is the linear fill. As you can see, there's a whole sheet of many. I know you can't see this, it's just like a white square, or rectangle, but there are lots to be doing, and I'll bring these out either every week, every other week. I do also want to, as I've said in the previous week, I want to get into lesson 33, page 33, sorry. This is, again, the bee's knees of everything. But yeah, there's loads of content here to get in and really, really get involved in. It can take months, years, even a lifetime, and you'd still never truly have mastered it. And that's not to be negative, that's to be positive and optimistic that there's just so much to learn from this. So that is your linear fill, take that away. You can sub that out for that bass drum. You could turn that into a hi-hat step, which would alternate the sound of it. You could add accents in some of those notes. You can ghost note some of those. You can make it into an absolute drum beat. So that's pretty much all I have in that linear thing. Now it really comes down to a Q&A, and I'm kind of hoping that some people come in and there's not just this three. I don't know how many we had last week. I know it got more. What do we got? Would it be made very different with a hi-hat from what you said earlier? Would what be made different? Would it sound different? It would. I mean, if the question is would it sound different, it would sound a lot different in sense of dynamics, in sonic, because the bass drum is obviously very low, thuddy. It is an additional drum of its own right, whereas a hi-hat is two cymbals coming together. So that's more of a, I guess you could look at it as a mid-range, trebly kind of like a chicky kind of clap sound coming together if you don't bark the hi-hat. So if you're barking the hi-hat, it's kind of like you dig it with your heel and pull it back, and it kind of washes it, and it allows itself to sizzle. A hi-hat bark is very difficult to verbalize without actually demonstrating. So in future, if anybody wants to see a hi-hat bark, I will get one in a video. What have we got here? Been playing drum. Like, does it of the music sound wise? I've been playing for 15 years, but does it affect the fit to a genre? To feel, I mean, I guess it would. It would have contextual approach in sense of you probably, I say you wouldn't. I mean, you would find it less in maybe a metalcore or fill or something crazy, because that's really, again, everything can be where it wants to be. You can put it in any style. I mean, I often put a 6-stroke roll, which is kind of like a gospel chop. I put that in a folk song if it fits, because these contexts are a little bit more broad. But yeah, you could probably find a hi-hat step, and I hope I'm answering this correctly. You could probably find a hi-hat step incorporated in a fill in a lot of what's the word? What's the genre? God, you got Tony Royster Jr. playing like R&B and hip hop and stuff. You would find it. You could also find it in clinicians, so people doing their own solos, which is almost in a sense genreless because they can go between all of them at one given moment. But yeah, it would less likely come out in singer-songwriter / kind of pop, and it would be more likely to come out in maybe a bit of an organic hip-hoppy kind of folk feel maybe. It's hard to answer these kinds of questions. I'm sorry. What's your favorite drum? What gives a good sound? My favorite drum, I'm going to assume, is in favorite drum size, shell. If that is the question, I think I had that question last week, and I think my chance, I've lost the viewer. They've been bored senseless. I think my choice would still remain the same. It would be the snare drum, because you can change things about it. You can make it sound differently. You can add a bigger snare bed under it, so you could have 32 strand or 24 strand. You could similarly have 12 strand. It will absolutely change the sound of the drum. With fewer snares, you hear more of the drum tone itself before the snares engage. Because obviously when you're striking, not this because it's a rubber pad, but when you strike, that obviously sends a big set of pressurized air down, rattles the snares, comes back. And sometimes with less snares, or a lot of times with thinner snares, you'll end up with more of a drum tom sound before those snares turn on and get active. Whereas if you've just got basically a palm-sized thickness of a snare strand, you're only ever going to hear that crack and rattle. You won't really get much of the drum tone itself, and so it kind of chokes it a bit and kills it. So in the nerdy answer I gave there, I stand by my snare drum. What gives a good sound? I mean, that's a subjective question. I can't really say, because what I might think is a good sound. So personally, we just did a gig and we just did an album, and I always use. I'm a big fan of a 12 strand / 14 strand, because that's very much in paying homage to the 20s, 30s, 40s old fashioned style snare sound, where they had fewer snare wires and it gives more of a life to the drum. You get more tonality. So to me, that sounds really good. A lot of people, when you play ghost notes on that, because you don't engage the snares very much with ghost notes, you end up sounding like it's a bit of a tom, a weird tom with maybe some rice left over on the head. A lot of people don't really like that. I quite do. I enjoy it. So what makes it sound good, again, is what you think sounds good, essentially. That's inherently a very subjective question, but that's the wonderful thing about it, is because then you can have 500 different drummers with all the same kit, and it could sound very, very different across all of them, or you could have 500 different sounds from 500 different people, and it helps make, obviously, a much more exciting industry, I guess you could call it, the music industry. What else do we got here? I think that's about it, really. I'm waiting for some of these people from Canada to tune in, like the Pianist Trieste, or Sensei Sushi. You guys were all there last week. You're not here this week. I don't know where you went, but hopefully you caught the gig. I know I plugged that last week, so that was fun. I don't really have much else to say. I'm kind of just talking to a computer and myself here, and my friends are sitting on the couch, like, 2 feet there. They're waving off camera, so I will extend that. Yeah, I mean, again, I really hope that this linear lesson does have some kind of impact and relevance and usefulness. I hope as these streams continue, more people tune in, so it can give importance and usefulness to these linear fills, grooves. Page 33. I mean, if this isn't something that's going to work, that's fine. I can do pre-recorded videos, but I just thought this might be a good way to engage straight off the bat. But yeah, this is all about more educational content out there in an appropriately consumable way, I guess you could say. But there you go. I have nothing else to say, and so I'm probably going to sign off. And all I can say is to the other subscribers that tuned in last week but didn't tune in this week, hopefully you end up catching it on replay. It's going to stay on the channel. And next week, I will be opting not for the linear, but next week I'll be bringing a page 33 bar, which will just be the downbeat. We'll be doing snare and bass drum on the downbeat with jazz ride, blues, shuffle, and the quarter note pulse. It's going to be wickedly bitching exciting. I hope I don't get demonetized for that. I don't make any money from this anyway, so you can't take any of my money, YouTube. Right. I'm going to sign off now. I hope to see you next Friday. We'll be looking at page 33.